Hello everybody, Maven here, and today Graviton Lance received a massive buff in PvE. They increased the damage of it by 67%. I don't think we've ever seen a weapon in Destiny history get that big of a buff. The transformation from Graviton Lance 2 seasons ago compared to now is drastic. It's basically an entirely new gun. So I just had to make a build with this thing to use it to its fullest potential. And one potential you could use it with is Sanguine Alchemy on Voidlock with Empowering Rift, because you'll tend to be stationary sometimes with the pulse rifle. However, I wanted to use it aggressively, so I decided to pair it with the GYRFALCON'S Hauberk on Void Hunter. So that's going to give us a constant uptime of volatile rounds and more. And let me tell you, Graviton Lance may just be the best PvE pulse rifle in the game now, right up there with things like Collective Obligation and OUTBREAK Perfected. So without further ado, let's talk about it. Don't forget to drop a like, and I hope you enjoy. So the Graviton Lance's Catalyst gives it Turnabout and Vorpal Weapon, some recent additions to this weapon that it previously didn't have a few seasons ago, so that's a nice little buff. But its main perk here is Cosmology, so kills with the weapon generate these purple balls that go and seek out and ball slap your enemies in the face. And you pair that with the GYRFALCON'S Hauberk, which gives our weapons volatile rounds when we exit invis, and that is going to be how the Graviton Lance is going to be excellent for ad clear. You're getting those volatile explosions, those Cosmology explosions, plus the little balls from Cosmology are going to cause distant enemies to become volatile, just cause purple explosions everywhere. So if you think about it, it's kind of as if the Graviton Lance has destabilizing rounds just built into it. So with this little combination is what hands down makes Graviton Lance the best ad clear pulse in the game. So now let's move on to a quick damage test against our good pal Carl to see the old damage versus the buff damage. So to the body we are doing 3200 damage, and to the crit we're doing 5200. And after the buff we're hitting 5200 damage to the body, which was our previous crit damage, and then we're hitting 8700 to the head. It is a massive improvement. So now we're going to do a side-by-side comparison, completely killing Carl. On the left we have the old version, on the right we have the buffed version with the plus 67% damage. We're on strand here because we're not counting things like volatile or surges, so we're just suspending to make it easier. And as you can see, the buffed Graviton really makes the old one look like a joke. And I really wish I could have got some Grandmaster gameplay with this for you guys, but there just wasn't enough time. But I can already tell from the amount of time I spent using this thing that it is definitely one of the new best ad clear weapons in the game. It is ridiculous. However, there is the Revision 0 that we have to talk about, because it is the only other weapon in the game that is the same archetype as the Graviton Lance when you switch it to the 2-burst fire mode. So just like the Graviton Lance, the Revision 0 does also have Vorpal Weapon. Now let's do another side-by-side comparison against Carl. So a couple things to note here is that the Revision 0 does have less in the magazine. It has 20 as opposed to Graviton having 30, but we do have 4th time's a charm to try to remedy this. And another thing you have to note here is that the Revision 0 is a kinetic weapon, so it does 10% more damage to unshielded combatants. And also keep in mind that Revision 0 did recently receive a 75% damage buff in PvE to its 2-burst fire mode, which is bigger than Graviton Lance's 67% damage buff. So the damage was somewhat similar. And both of these weapons do have their benefits. You know, the Revision 0 can turn into that sniper rifle mode, and it has intrinsic anti-barrier and has flexible perk options. However, with the Graviton Lance, when you pair it with volatile rounds, and especially with Cosmology, it is a lot better for ad clear, whereas Revision 0 is more meant for damage. And on top of that, when you have volatile rounds, your weapon actually has anti-barrier on it. So they're both anti-barrier weapons. So while damage is an appealing idea in Destiny 2, you gotta remember that these weapons are primary weapons. What are primary weapons for? Ad clear. So the Graviton Lance may just be better. But is it the best pulse rifle? Because we do have to compare it to the king of pulse rifles ever since the beginning of time, the OUTBREAK Perfected. As you know, this weapon ramps up in damage the more you damage a target because it puts these Siva nanites on them, which make your weapon do more damage, and your teammates can also do the same, and your guys' Siva nanites work off of each other, so it is a collaborative weapon. Also reloads a lot quicker than our other options because of Outlaw, and also, when you kill an enemy with a critical hit, it's going to spread those Siva nanite seekers around kind of like a solar swarm grenade, so it can be decent for ad clear as well, albeit it's a little bit more limited. So moving on to the side-by-side comparison, and you'll quickly find out that the OUTBREAK Perfected completely blows it out of the water. Is it better for ad clear? Absolutely not. The Graviton Lance is definitely the clear winner when you pair it with the GYRFALCON'S, But the Outbreak Perfected is the king of damage for pulse rifles, and one of the highest damaging primaries in the game. So now let's break down the build. So obviously with the GYRFALCON'S Hauberk, our #1 priority is having a million ways to be able to go invis. So the first aspect here is Vanishing Step, obviously a staple, simply dodge to go invis. Stylish Executioner, defeating a weakened, suppressed, or volatile target grants invisibility, and True Sight, which lets you see through walls. But we have a few different ways to proc this. Our nades are going to be able to weaken targets because of Echo of Undermining. And then our smoke bombs can also weaken targets. Echo of Obscurity can make us go invis when we perform a finisher. So between this, and this, our dodge, grenade, and melee all make us invis. So pretty much everything we do makes us invis, all of our abilities. So it's very, very easy to maintain that invisibility. Moving on, we got Echo of Persistence to increase the duration of our invisibility, and our Devour. That's important because we're running Echo of Starvation. So we pick up Void Preach or an Orb of Power. We get Devour, which obviously on Final Blows restores all of our health and also grants us grenade energy, and that is very valuable because of Echo of Undermining, and it's also a Grenadier build with 100 discipline. Now you can run Gambler's Dodge if you want to get more smoke bombs to go invis more, but I'm running Marksman Dodge simply because I'm using the Retrofit Escapade as my heavy of choice. So if you did want to take full advantage of those volatile rounds from the GYRFALCON'S, even for your heavy, then the Retrofit Escapade is going to be your best friend. It works very well with the volatile despite Bungie nerfing that interaction. So you should have 4 times a charm as well as target lock. I swapped it, I'm going to switch it back, but it should be target lock. But the Retrofit is the highest DPS legendary machine gun that there is. I'd recommend using a DPS heavy and not an ad clear heavy like the Commemoration because your primary is already meant for the ad clear. So definitely use a DPS choice, but you know, you don't really have to use a Retrofit because this build is kind of just based around the Graviton, so you can use whatever you need to use in the heavy slot. You don't have to use the Retrofit, it's just a suggestion. And for my kinetic of choice, I'm using the Heritage for that burst damage with that recombination. Excellent option to pair something like a pulse rifle because you want to do that heavy burst because the Graviton's obviously not a DPS weapon, it's more for ad clear. And if you didn't want to waste heavy, then a shotgun I feel like is the best middle ground to have up here. But you can also use a chill clip Riptide if you wanted to, if you're dealing with champions, because it can deal with overloads and unstops. It can technically also deal with barriers, but it's not super good at that. But remember that your volatile rounds you get on your Graviton will give it intrinsic anti-barrier. So all you need to do is deal with those other two, which the Riptide can easily do that. So if you're dealing with champions, definitely run the Riptide. Now on to the mod setup. It has kind of the same idea of it as the Surturacnes Facade video I did a couple days ago, which I'll link in the card up above. I recommend checking out. Shameless plug. But yeah, it's also using stacks on stacks with double surge. That's just a combo that I've been very much liking recently. Just to have a constant 17% damage buff is very nice to have, and pair that with time dilation so you can just have that buff at all times. That's really going to help the Graviton Lance shred through ads. So all we have to do here is make orbs. The first way is going to be Reaper, so we dodge and our next weapon Final Blow is going to make an orb. We're doing that all the time. And then Void Siphon should be very easy to proc because of the amount of ad clear we're doing with our Graviton Lance, so that should be crazy. And then since it's a 100 discipline Grenadier build with Devour, it's going to be very easy to proc Firepower as well, and those Void Grenades are so good. So then we got Bomb Runner class item, we dodge, we get more nade energy, we got triple resist on our chest. You can swap these out for whatever you really need. On my gloves here, I have Void Loader because, you know, if I'm using an ad clear primary, I'd want it to either not ever have to reload or have a blindingly fast reload. And, you know, our Graviton Lance definitely could use a little bit of help. So I wanted to run that just for the consistency. For this mod here, you can really use whatever. I just threw on Bolstering Detonation for the heck of it, but this slot is very interchangeable. And for my helmet, since, you know, I'm dodging your enemies, especially if you're using Gambler's Dodge, you're going to be dodging your enemies all the time. So Dynamo is great for that. And then Ashes to Assets to get some super energy back. Now stat-wise, since this is PvE we're talking about here, we got around 100 resilience. That is a requirement. And then obviously a requirement is a minimum of 3 intellect, never drop below that. And then invest 100 into discipline if you can, or get as much as you can, the rest into mobility, and then you don't really have to worry about recovery or strength. So the gameplay loop here, when you start an engagement, throw a nade if you got one, because that's going to trigger undermining. And then you can kill that enemy to go invis, save your dodge, you can proc bomber with that. Your goal here is to really make orbs of power. Proc that Reaper, proc that Void Siphon. Go and get that orb, because what that orb's going to do is give you Devour, and that really gets the train rolling. And once you get that train rolling and you pick up that orb and you get your 2 stacks of armor charge with stacks on stacks, you're going to have that 17% damage buff for like 30 something seconds with your Void Surges, and you're just going to start mowing down everything with your Graviton Lance. It is very easy to use. So there you have it. Overnight, Graviton Lance became one of the best exotic primaries in the game. Try it out. I think out of all of the weapons in Destiny's history, Graviton Lance has undergone the most changes in such a short amount of time. It used to fire slower and suck. Now it fires fast, and it's amazing. And GYRFALCON Hauberk plus Graviton Lance is definitely going to be a very viable thing to use in Grandmaster Nightfalls moving forward. Being able to proc those anti-barrier rounds on command, plus the very good ad clear, and it's Void Hunter, so obviously that is already a meta thing to use in Grandmasters. So as always, I will leave a dim loadout link to this build down below in the description and the pinned comment if you'd like to give it a try. And that about does it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit the like button and drop a comment, because YouTube sees these actions as interactions, and the more people interact on the video, the more it does better in the algorithm. So I'd greatly appreciate it if you did one of those things. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. Would love to have you here. And with that, I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.